last Thursday during our committee meeting. This is from Kelsey Olson with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and she provides some answers for you, so I just thought I'd draw your attention to that. Request for bill introductions. I do know we have a couple bill introduction requests from the department, has at least one. Deputy Secretary Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I would like to introduce Senate RS number 0503. This draft entails details regarding to our National Poultry Improvement Program plan.
All right, committee questions? Is there objection to introduction of the bill? Seeing none, the bill will be introduced. Thank you. We also have a bill request introduction from the Kansas Livestock Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Taylor Nickel on behalf of the Kansas Livestock Association, and the KLA would like to request introduction of 25 RS 0488. The bill would repeal non-resident landowner and non-resident tenant deer permits. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. That will be an interesting committee, interesting legislation if we get to that. Is there objection to introduction of the bill? Seeing none, the bill will be introduced. Thank you. Those were the only two that I had been aware of that there would be bill requests. Are there bill requests from any committee member? Seeing none, we will move forward with our committee agenda. First up today, we have a presentation from the Kansas Water Office, and I don't know who will be going first, if it will be Consultant Lorenz or Chair Bueller. So could you identify yourself? I probably mispronounced your name.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dawn Bueller, and I am the chair of the Kansas Water Authority.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, members of the committee. It's wonderful to be here today in the State House. It was a bit of a cold morning, but grateful to have this day with you all. Today, I am representing the Kansas Water Authority, and there are 13 Water Authority members that are voting members and 11 ex officios. And I also represent over 140 regional advisory committee members across the state that work on water issues for Kansas. First thing, if I have to leave here momentarily, I am presenting in front of House Water at 9 a.m., so just wanted to mention that when I'm done here. I'm going to start off, I'm going to make this brief because I know that Julie Lorenz also is presenting to you. But if you have in front of you the annual report of the Kansas Water Authority. First thing I'd like to say to you all is thank you very much for the dollars that you have put into the State Water Plan Fund. The money that you've given us has helped us to solve problems in your communities and to help Kansans across the state. This report is keeping with our duties to provide an accounting of the State Water Plan. We believe it also creates transparency and accountability for the funds that are put into the State Water Plan Fund. So the first thing is on page 3. There's more information about the Kansas Water Authority. I won't go through that, but just to bring it to your attention. On page 7, these are the investment highlights, 7 through 9. And I'd specifically like to talk about page 10. Page 10 is an overview of the Senate substitute for House Bill 2302, which are the grant programs that were created as part of the State Water Plan funding in 2023. And I specifically would like to show you how on page 11, the number of awards in 24 and 25. And there was a total amount awarded for the first in 2024 of $18 million. But we want to show you that there were 309 applications submitted worth $380 million in total requests, of which we had $18 million available to award. And in showing that to you is to show you the need across the state. we still have a lot of communities that need these programs. Specifically, Senator Titus, I'd like to thank you for your work on this bill. It has been incredibly beneficial to communities across Kansas. In FY25, we had 286 applications submitted, worth $227 million in total requests, and there was $27 million available to award. These dollars that were available to award, that's a lot of money. And so I want to let you know how grateful we are for those dollar amounts. But we also wanted to be sure and show you how many total requests there are across the state. The next 2 pages go through the State Water Plan Fund recommendations, and folks from the Kansas Water Office will come back and go through all of this information in detail for you. Then I'm going to skip ahead to page 14 and 15, and these are the recommendations for state policy. So every year, the Kansas Water Authority votes on recommendations to bring to the State House. Our first recommendation is the Kansas Water Plan Implementation Framework, which you will hear about today from Julie Lorenz. This is what we've been working on all year, so we are asking for your support for that framework. The second item is project management support. We know that we're going to need some time to ramp up projects. That's what we heard from the public. They wanted us to have a ramp-up period before we introduce a statewide plan. So we're asking for support for that. The State Water Plan Fund budget, we have moved to create line items that align with the State Water Plan. So we have different, we have the 5 guiding principles of the State Water Plan, so we moved the budget to meet with those line items. So water quality, water quantity and aquifer, reservoirs, resilience, and research and education. And the last thing on page 16 gives you an overview of the strategic implementation planning, what we went through this year, how many people we talked to across the state, and what we heard from Kansans. And Julie will go through that in more detail. So I have the annual report, and then also this document, the Kansas Water Plan Implementation Framework. That's the document that Julie will go through. And then you should also have 3 individual flyers. And those are just a breakdown of information so that you can have it quickly and easily at your fingertips. One thing I would like to highlight in the annual report is that we did provide an additional, on page 15, additional funding recommendation of $20 million. And you'll also note that the governor in her budget put in an additional recommendation for $30 million. The governor's budget built upon that of the Kansas Water Authority, but it also added in an additional $10 million for those grant-funded projects that we talked about earlier that had such a large need. And with that, I'd like to make sure that I leave enough time for Julie Lorenz to talk to you in detail about the implementation framework. And sir, if there's any questions.
Any questions for Chair Bueller? I did have a question as it relates to the funding. Once we give, you mentioned in fiscal year 24, $18 million. What's the accountability? Is there a follow-up from the Water Office?
Yes, sir. The Water Office will be able to give you complete detail of how those dollars were spent when they come in for their budget overview.
All right. So the entity that you provide the dollars to provides an accounting to the Water Office? Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had noticed that on this water plan budget increase list, under research and education, there is like $1,640,000 for program accountability and evaluation. So I'm assuming that's for the entire range of expenditures, not just the new additions.
So this line item, program accountability and evaluation, Julie will talk about this in more detail, but when we went across the state and talked to folks at the local consult meetings, what we heard is that they wanted accountability and evaluation of all of the programs in the state water plan. And so this line item is for agencies to consolidate programs, set up the processes and have an evaluation of those programs so that ongoing they can report back not only to you but also to the public about the use of those taxpayer dollars. So this is to set up that piece of it in a 2-year ramp-up period. And if you'd like more detail, I would be more than happy, sir, if you'd like, for the Kansas Water Office to provide any additional detail.
Any information you provide the committee is always appreciated and beneficial. Seeing no additional questions, thank you. We will turn to Principal Consultant Julie Lorenz for her presentation. I did not make the Water Office aware ahead of time, and I apologize. We do have an additional presentation today. So around 9:05, we will be moving then to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, just so you have fair warning. And there may be questions. We will ask for questions to be held until the end, so you might try to leave a little time for the committee to ask questions if you don't mind.
Sure. Chairman, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad to be here today. I'm Julie Lorenz. You might know me previously as the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation, and now I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to come back and help the Water Office and the other agencies, KDHE and Department of Ag as well, in putting together a framework to implement the water plan. So really it's operationalizing the plan and figuring out what dollars need to be invested and honestly what business practices may need to be changed to deliver this plan. I'm going to ask whoever's running the slide presentation. So anticipating that we don't have much time, I've tabbed the slides that I think we need to spend a little time on. We won't get through everything today, and we stand ready to meet individually or in groups with senators as you prefer, because there's a lot of detail to cover, so happy to set up one-on-ones. You're also getting sort of the full brief. You've got a thick packet there. As I said, we'll just get to a few specific slides. So if we can bring up the next slide, please. All right, let's see. Okay, quick note, we talked to more than 1,500 Kansans. We met with more than 50 stakeholder meetings along the way, including with the GMDs, with Farm Bureau, with KLA, all sorts of groups, conservation districts, all sorts of groups. Important to note, in this framework, we identify 43 outcomes to be measured, to your point, Senator Francisco, and we have 8 recommendations to move forward with. Next slide, please. The key takeaways, what we heard from Kansans, 3 primary things. First, there's urgency associated with implementing this plan. More than 100 Kansas communities are at risk of running out of water, and we also know more than 70,000 Kansans rely on water supplies that have at least one health violation. So there's urgency associated with this action. Kansans support an increase in funding, but also, when I say that, connected with changes in the delivery of these programs and greater understanding of how dollars are used and an understanding of the outcomes associated with those investments. As I said to House Water last week, you all need to have the information you can take back to your voters to explain how these dollars are being used and to what benefit. And lastly, Kansans, while they support additional funding for implementation, they recognize that you don't just sort of go full tilt all at once, that you need a ramp-up period. And so the ramp-up period is built into this thinking. It's much like our transportation programs. Our transportation programs stand on 40 years of development. So we can move a little more quickly when we make changes in transportation. Here, we're really in fact, you all have the benefit. You are at the ground floor, so to speak, of reshaping the way water is delivered in Kansas. That's a great opportunity for all of us, and to take some lessons from transportation. Next slide. A couple of the benefits, and I'll just highlight one in terms of implementing this 10-year water program, and it has to do with economic development and economic viability of our communities. Hard to recruit a business into your community if you can't guarantee 40 years worth of water supply or more. So there's an economic benefit in association with the health benefit when it comes to making sure that we have a clean and plentiful water supply. Next slide. Okay, what's important to note about the way this implementation framework works is three things. We've got these 2-year outcomes. I would say Senator Titus has been like relentless in saying, how's the money being used? And I want to know what those outcomes look like. So we have built outcomes for the next 2 years, along with what would be possible over a 10-year period, again, depending on funding. Everything is connected to how much money can be invested and having the resources in terms of people power, too, connected to these 8 recommendations. It's a package that comes together. Next slide. All right, if there's one slide to sort of key off of, it's this one in terms of how do things work in this program. So starting at the top, this 2-year ramp-up period, and you'll see it's both green and blue. Green represents legislative action, right? So agencies can begin some work, shown there in blue, in terms of implementing some of the recommendations in the plan. In some cases, some of the recommendations require some additional funding, so that's why we shaded it in both colors. As we begin to work through this build-up period, establishing these evaluation metrics to understand, are we really moving the needle on programs? Are we seeing results based on these investments? And to launch the framework recommendations, which you also see in blue there. You see across the 10-year period, ongoing evaluation, maybe reshaping some programs. We've got a lot to learn as we implement these programs. We may need to get rid of some programs, reshape them. We'll do that in concert with both the legislature as well as with Kansans through this every 2-year local consult process that also includes the RACs and the Water Authority. You can see here then a little bit lower, it says legislature establishes long-term dedicated revenue source. We talked to Kansans about what they thought would be a good amount of money to put toward water. There was good support for $140 million per year, and in some cases, some folks said more than that. We also asked people what they thought about various revenue sources, but it's not the agency's role to say that. It's to bring some of that thinking to this body for your contemplation and for your thinking about how you would want to execute that. I think back to the way we, on transportation, in 2018, we had the legislative task force that went around the state and heard from Kansans. In 2019, then KDOT went around the state and had lots of local consult meetings. And anyways, some of that 2019 process has occurred. And then in 2020, through the legislative process, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program was put together. And I recall on a Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m., before the end of an abbreviated session due to COVID, that IKE was passed with 94% support, both sides of the aisle. But it went through a process that included stakeholders, the general public, and the legislature. So I think there are some lessons to be learned from that deliberative process. And I think that there are some lessons to be learned there, and I bring that to you all for your consideration. Then you pass a program at some point, and it needs to be dynamic so that we can ramp up and down based on how many revenues are available at the state level, but also what are we learning? Where are we? Water is a two-way street, so to speak. We may have years of drought. We may have more rain. So there needs to be enough flexibility paired with accountability to deliver a program that really matters for Kansans, and then be able to report what those outcomes look like. Okay, now we're going to zoom through a couple of slides. I would say that this, we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, we're bold in the way that we reshape some of our thinking, but very practical by reporting results, and by this 2-year ramp-up period, not trying to overpromise what can be delivered. Next slide is kind of the same sort of thing that would hit on an incremental and fiscally responsible approach. Next slide. Would love to come back someday and spend time on these, but I'm trying to move right along. This shows that dynamic program and connections with both a 10-year view of water, but every 2-year touch points with stakeholders. Next slide. Important to note on this slide that in the framework, we lay out various programs and how you might implement those programs. What we haven't done, though, in that framework, it wouldn't have been appropriate, is we weren't really clear on any particular budget. Today, I'm prepared to share with you, from the governor's view, how we might use that $30 million in additional funding. So I just want to point out that's not included in the framework because the framework is intended to be an ongoing living document, not necessarily a budgetary document. Also, so let's move on to the next slide. Happy to come back and talk with you sometime about how stakeholders wanted to prioritize investments at the $60, $120, and $360 million annual investments. By and large, Kansas landed back on the 140. Those aren't arbitrary numbers. Those are based on what agencies came up with in terms of being able to deliver different outcomes. Next slide. Okay, I know this is part of the transition or evolution from agencies, so many agencies that are delivering water programs. And I would suggest to you we need to be agency agnostic. It's not about which agency gets how much money. It's how much money are we investing to solve problems. The Water Office calls these principles, I call them problems. How much do we want to invest to fix water quality? How much do we want to fix aquifers? It's a shift that occurred in transportation about 20 years ago when we moved from allocating within the department specifics for various little programs, and we said, how much are we going to spend on expansion, modernization, and preservation? Nested under the three big things KDOT does, then we allocated based on these like sub-programs. That's what this approach represents here, is solving big problems in an agency-agnostic way that you then dive down into the individual program level. Okay, next slide. This one. I have a series of these slides. We don't have time to go through them, but I want you to sort of understand the construct, and you have this information in your packet. So, for example, we have more than 140 hazardous waste sites that need to be remediated. So you see that? That's the top bar. In the base budget, in today's base budget, we could address 4 of those sites. With the enhancement, we could get to 6 sites. If we were to have a fully funded program, we could get to 50 or more sites by 2035. And so we identify by category what we can accomplish with the base, what could be accomplished with additional funds, the additional 30 million enhancement, and should we get to roughly 140 million, what could be accomplished with that amount of money. Again, it's scalable. If it ends up being 100 million, there would be fewer. If it was 200 million, there would be more. The point is you have to understand the levers and how that ripple effect occurs. Okay, next slide. Want to point out here, in this case, across the top, this isn't that we would be spending 60 million on groundwater, rural and private groundwater support. Rather, look at the bottom where we would be able to address 10 counties with the base budget, 25 counties with the enhancement. In this case, that's about $500,000. So that's the difference that makes. You might look over at the far right and say, well, you only doubled the counties, but who knows how much more money you put in there. We are able to get to multiple locations within a single county on the far right. So lots to dig into. Next slide. When it relates to the budget, I'm just trying to give you an overview. I think you'll have lots of questions, but it gives you an overview. In this case, for example, understanding that we didn't do a straight, like everybody gets 500,000 more or 1 million more. We scaled the enhancement based on both the need and the ability to deliver. So in this case, you can see we range from 500,000 on the groundwater piece to up to 10 million for infrastructure investments. Again, I think there's a lot to dig into here, but want you to be aware of it. Okay, and on to house water they go, and I'll follow them in a little bit. Okay, we can go on now. We have the same sort of information. Let's go on to reservoirs, resiliency, keep going. So now I'm just going to have you go until we get to research and education. Keep going, go. Here we go. All right, so Kansans didn't say, we want you to invest in research and education directly. What they said is, we want to know how our dollars are being used and if they're accomplishing anything. The way you do that is through measuring, by taking a look at what's the condition before you start your action and then after, And what is the action that really had the biggest difference? So that's why we're investing now, so that we can make sure over the 2-year period, we can come back to you and say, now these things work, these things were not so great, and we have to ask your patience, because if we don't figure out what doesn't work, we might continue to invest in it. So we want to really refine our programs. And this was the key ask from stakeholders. Help us know that our dollars are being used wisely. So that's the genesis of this. Okay, on to the next slide. This is the overall investment to solve problems, including the $30 million to accelerate the ramp up. So it's 60 base plus 30 for ramp up. Next slide. The framework includes 8 recommendations. Here we go. Let's stop here for a second. These are like the elite 8. Could we have had more? We could have had 100 recommendations. We tried to zip it down to the best, to the 8. I want to call your attention to 3 things. The first recommendation is sort of the linchpin of the whole thing, which is to say, Kansans deserve to have a 50-year water supply. And every generation is responsible for making sure that they can go forward with 50 years of water. So it's from now, 2025 to 2075. In 2035, this 10-year rolling program, we say, all right, what do we need to do to make sure we have water in 2085? So it rolls every 10 years to assure. Now, you might say, as a county commissioner said to me, there are places where we don't have 25 years in some places in our state. What we have to start with is, how do we develop a plan for every community, every Kansan to have 50 years worth of water supply? They don't necessarily have it now, but in the next 10 years, how can we start to generate that? What does that look like? And in the course of 10 years, then we figure out what 2085 is going to look like. It has to roll. This idea of forever water sounds good. I don't know how you deliver forever water. We have to get it down to actual things that people can work on. I also want to call attention to recommendation number 3, this prioritizing regional needs, looking at regional basins. There is a great lesson to be learned from Coffeyville and Caney. Caney almost ran out of water. They're now going to purchase 250,000 gallons a day from Coffeyville. It helps Coffeyville because they have an active water department. They'll have a new customer, so to speak, and Caney needs water. What we are suggesting in this recommendation is that before a community can receive funds, they have to have looked at regionalization. They don't necessarily have to have a plan in place, but they need to see if it's possible. Not every place in our state is it possible, but we want communities to be thinking long-term and to have a backup plan, so to speak. And then I also want to give a shout out to Senator Fagg on number 8, this enhanced federal collaboration. Really, thank you, because of his push and working with our federal delegation and others at the federal level. The way interest is calculated has changed from being compound interest to simple interest. Kansas is going to benefit by about $40 million a year, and that is the source for the increased $30 million for water. So we know that our federal delegation is important, and getting into those details in a banker sort of way can make a big difference, and we can be the beneficiaries of that work. All right, should you have us come back? We're going to go through these slides because this is the detail on each of these recommendations. We talk about what the recommendation means, what we would accomplish in 2 years, and what would be accomplished in 10 years. So let's scooch on through these, please. Okay. Keep going. We will come back someday to talk about each of these recommendations, should you want that. Keep going till we get to one more, please. Okay. A point here that this is work, it's not magic. So we have to have some dollars available for additional staff. And when we say independent evaluation, that's probably not conducted by the agencies themselves. So probably some consultant support will be needed as well. So there are dollars in that budget so that we have work and we aren't relying on magic to deliver water for our citizens. Okay, now we've got a whole series of slides. It's sort of a case study, if you will, where we explain how we would go through if we were looking at irrigation technology, how we would evaluate the program, go to local consult should we think we need to make changes, come to the legislature, so that by the end of 10 years, we're accomplishing our goals. So let's go through these slides. Happy to come back and have this conversation if you want it. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, this is a slide that shows you the connection between what our challenges are and how the recommendations address those challenges. Next slide. All right, the need to maintain momentum. So Dawn started with a thank you, and I echo that thank you as well for the funds, the additional funds that have been made available. Clearly, Kansans need support, and when I say they need support, they need better infrastructure. They also need better technical assistance out in our communities. Many of our towns don't have the resources they need. They don't have the technical expertise, so that help is needed. And I want to call your attention to last Friday afternoon. No kidding. 200 stakeholders were on the call so that we could walk stakeholders through the recommendations and the budget recommendations. So, you know, it gets to be like 4:30, and we are still right at it, going through detail by detail, and people stayed on the phone. That is a testament to how important this is and how people want to be informed and stay engaged. So we are really asking for your help in maintaining this momentum, because Kansans are very interested not only in investment, but in shifting the way we think about water and we deliver water. Okay, next slide, which gets me to this point, which is the reallocation of about $3.3 million. This would have been in sort of previous thinking, carryover funds. The governor said no, no carryover. We have a pipeline of projects. We know where we need work to be done. This is the list of projects starting off with the Equus beds near Wichita. The money's important. So is the thinking, and having a pipeline of projects. That's what some of these recommendations speak to, much like we have at KDOT. We know that we can add a mile or two. If costs come in lower, we can decide, do we want to save that money or do we want to apply it and finish another mile or two? Same thinking here. Take the dollars, if they couldn't have been used for one reason or another, and apply those, but you have to have projects that are ready to go. That's part and parcel of this thinking. Okay, I think, next slide. This might be the best of all. All right, so this slide. So Representative, so at the Governor's Water Conference, we had a student panel. And so from K-State, KU, Fort Hays State, Joe's on the far right. So he comes from, he's either a 5th or 6th generation farmer. He's in ROTC, he's at Fort Hays State, he wants to go back to the farm. And the reason that I think Joe is important, it's because I think he's so forthright about the whole thing. He's like, I want to do the right thing. I want to use better technology. I want to conserve water for the kids I don't have yet, the kids I hope I have, and I want to be able to give my farm to my kids and their grandkids. But I also have to make a living. And so I can't just plant every other crop that doesn't use water. He's like, I need help. And I want to be able to go back to my farm and give it to my kids. And I think there's a whole state that's relying on all of us to figure out this water thing. And I think Joe's who I think of, because I left that conference really hopeful. We got a bunch of smart kids and students, young leaders, and they want us to set up the system that they can then evolve later, that they can fine-tune later. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. I also recognize you don't have much time, so I'm happy to come back.
I appreciate your presentation. I apologize to the Kansas Water Office. I thought it was just going to be a presentation on the annual budget. And you've got much more information. So committee, this is a massive topic, something we have been discussing off and on for years, but the chair would like for us to make great progress, if not full implementation this year on some type of a future water plan. Would you be available tomorrow at the same time to come back, or does tomorrow not work for you to spend more?
I think I can, but may I check my schedule real quick? I think that works.
Sure. If she is available, committee, that's where I would ask you to ask your questions. We will let her have the full time to go over, review this presentation, and I would encourage you to take this with you and spend some time looking at the information between now and the next committee. You are available tomorrow morning at 8:30? Okay. We will do that. Rather than just squeeze the committee too much, we will give you the whole committee tomorrow. And committee, we will do a deeper dive into some information, getting your questions, and allowing Consultant Lorenz to provide answers and information. And again, I did not know that the presentation would be this beneficial to the committee. Not that the water office wouldn't be, of course, beneficial, but I expected it to be more of an annual report than what you have, which I thank you for your report, and we look forward to tomorrow. We will spend more time with you.
I look forward to it too. Thank you. Thank you
Sure.
for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. And committee, we will now move to the Department of Agriculture. And the reason that the chair put the Department of Agriculture on the same day as the water office was to accommodate Secretary Beam's schedule, so he could be the one making the presentation. And so we will turn it over to Secretary Mike Beam. You've got until about 9:25, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Secretary Beam. It's an honor to be before the committee. We can talk about a lot of things. I have 4 pages of prepared remarks, and then hopefully you will see an attachment that has a lot of detail. Obviously, I won't go through all that today. But in respect your time and try to be concise and just kind of hit the high points I think that you'd be of interest to. So I always like to remind audiences that agriculture as a whole is the largest industry and economic driver of the state. And I say that because we consider there are 73 sectors of the economy that involved in agriculture. And those 73 sectors, the last economic analysis showed a $61.89 billion direct output in the state. And then there is more information in the handout. But if you look at indirect and induced, it's over $88 billion. And with 260,000 jobs, that's 13% of our state workforce that are involved in those 73 agriculture sectors. And I might add, we have this data on a county-by-county basis. It's on our website. If you would like assistance in trying to locate that for your own interest, we'd be glad to help you with that. It's quite interesting to see, the largest sectors on a county-by-county basis. But not only is it significant in the state of Kansas, agriculture in Kansas is pretty significant nationwide. Prior to the 2022 Ag Census, in 2017, where we were the 5th largest state as far as economic output, the last census bumped us down to 7. So we're looking at California, Texas, Iowa, Nebraska, and then Illinois and Minnesota jumped ahead of us in the 22 census. I expect there'll be some changes in that in the 2027 census. It's related to commodity prices, livestock prices, et cetera. I know that you had a presentation by Deputy Secretary Olson on ag exports. I would again like to mention that we are a major ag exporting state, 7th in the nation, and it makes up a third of all the Kansas exports are related to agriculture. And we have 77 partners or companies, entities that we export to, with Japan, Mexico, Japan, Canada, China, and South Korea making up the bulk of those. I would also say we do entertain some inbound missions, and we'll be doing some of that here later in 2025. Despite the large exports, we are a little bit in a down economy on agriculture. In the handout, you'll see pages on the price charts. There's 2 pages. And as you'll see, compared to the last 4 years, most of all the grains are down significantly. The bright spot has been on the livestock sector, especially the beef cattle sector, which has helped overall numbers look fairly positive. But despite that, our net farm income will be down significantly, and the debt is up considerably. Of course, not like it was in the farm crisis of 1980, but certainly one that is not a positive trend. Probably one of the biggest issues that we had to face the last year or two was animal disease response, more specifically, highly pathogenic avian influenza. So since 2022, there's been a lot of outbreaks of this influenza. It's went to all 50 states. For our state, the impact has largely been on the poultry industry. And we really, it still continues to be true this year. We really hadn't had a lot, hardly any cases since April of 2024 until recently. And then in December and early 2025, we've had 9 positive cases of HPAI. Most of those have been backyard flocks. There's been 2 wild game bird or commercial flocks that were infected. What was really also surprising is that in the spring of 2024, last spring, we began to see positive cases of this in our dairy herds. We had 4 dairy herds show sign or had actually positives, but there were many, many other states that had large amounts of this in their dairy herds. 4 states, particularly California, Colorado, Idaho, and Michigan, have had a lot of infectious dairies. In fact, California had over 700 of their dairies show up as positive with HPAI. So far, again, we haven't had any this spring. What we did do in cooperation and at the encouragement of USDA a few weeks ago, we started taking bulk milk samples from the processing plants and sending those in and having them tested. If that starts to show some positive, which could be a fragmentation of DNA, but not necessarily a positive infection, we'll go back and look at some of those herds. You had a pretty good presentation on water. I would just say that we were, of course, involved in a lot of the discussions and outreach this summer. In fact, we had several staff members that helped facilitate those sessions and where a lot of that information was gathered. On the page 3, I have a series of bullets on just some things that we pulled out as far as our direct involvement in the water plant expenditures. And because of the enhancements that occurred last year, we were able to do, a $500,000 pilot stockwater initiative project that was highly successful as far as the number of people who applied. We had $4.5 million for the high hazard potential dam repairs that needed to take place. I think we had close to $10 million in applications, but we were able to make significant strides with helping folks get those repaired. A lot of funds went out in irrigation technology that would help irrigators be more efficient. And then we have leased or in the process of leasing water rights along the Rattlesnake Creek so that we can conserve that water and help address the impairment for that wildlife refuge. There's a whole host of other things that I won't go into more detail. I will say that what I'm excited about is that we're about to launch the 5-year regional conservation partnership program with USDA. We received a $25 million grant, federal dollars, for over 5 years. It has to be matched, so we're using existing funds that have been appropriated for water expenditures in cooperation with the groundwater management districts, and we'll be rolling that out here starting in 2025. You'll see at the bottom of page 3, top of page 4, I was just going to mention that there's been kind of a organic type approach, but there seems to be a lot of interest and concern by grassland owners in the state over the loss of grassland, primarily due to woody species encroachment. So if you pay attention, if you've watched over the years, you see that we've had significant loss of grassland. In fact, we've lost about 929,000 acres to woody encroachment just from 1990 to 2019. So we don't have any recommendations. I started meeting with some ranchers and other stakeholders at their request, and I think we'll probably have some more sessions in 2025 to see if there's something that can be done to help change that tide. I think I'll just wrap up there. Again, there's lots of data in the handout, but you know it's a real honor to be serve as your secretary. We have a great staff, and I've been really appreciative of how they've worked with folks and always seeking to improve. And of course, we always welcome any suggestions or input that you may have. So 9:18, I'll pause for questions.
Mr. Secretary, Committee, I will just draw your attention to the documents that the department had provided. I find it interesting, the hard red wheat, winter wheat prices and the corn prices and the other graphs that are in the handout, how they have fluctuated since January of 2020, gone up and down. Looks like they're going down right now on a downward trend. But questions of Secretary Beam? Senator Tyus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Secretary Beam. Could you talk about the balance between federal and state money and resources in the avian influenza responses over the last year?
Yes, so when there's a positive case or an infected flock, we obviously have quick communication with USDA because they're the entity that will reimburse or pay an indemnity for that. So, but we're usually the first ones on the line to gather the specimens and get it tested. USDA has paid for the tests, and sometimes we'll have a USDA veterinarian help us, but then we'll go out with our staff and do the depopulation, work with KDHE on a location, usually for burial and so forth. So USDA does take a lot of the costs for this, but we have the man hours and some of the travel that would be associated with it.
Senator Alley.
Mr. Chair, are you coordinating with the water department? I know you said you had $50 million here. Are you coordinating with the water department in the overall water plan then?
Yes. Yes, our Division of Water Resources and our Division of Conservation have been involved in all the meetings and trying to gather the information and make recommendations for how the water plan funding is appropriated. Yes.
One of the things that was brought up was the reclaiming the water in the feed yards. Is there a process going on there? Is there a study going on how to do that?
There's actually projects and monies being invested by some of the feed yards to reuse water that you can't capture at all. But instead of it just going into the lagoon, there's a fairly expensive but process where you can treat that and then reuse it for drinking water for the livestock. So that's part of the funds that were used for helping with those. And obviously there's more demand and more interest in more people participating in that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Alley. That kind of helps the committee understand that there are multiple agencies involved in water, and sometimes it's hard to follow the bouncing ball. And that's where I would like to see a consolidation of some sort to make life easier for legislators to understand and make certain that the tax dollars we appropriate are being invested to the best that they can be. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Beam. You talked about the grasslands, and we do know that fire is often used, particularly in our Flint Hills. What opportunities are there? I'm assuming this is invasive cedar that we're threatening some of our grasslands.
That is a major one, is the growth of eastern red cedar. That can be controlled with fire. So in some cases, there's not a real, in some areas, there's not a strong fire culture where it's welcomed. And to be honest with you, that if you look at spring burning, there's only so many days that the weather's going to permit burning, and you're not going to get around to all of it. So it's important that we have a good federal and state regulatory climate that, and local officials who will support and allow prescribed controlled burning. But that is the most economical way to handle it. But we need more fire. And I might add, I provided some documentation in the Water Authority. I should have attached it, but there's a water component to this. The amount of water that the woody species and the evergreens and the eastern red cedars take up, is, especially along riparian areas, is significant. So it also contributes to less water availability.
Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Secretary. Pleasure to see you again, and thanks for your testimony today. One quick comment. I complimented your Deputy Secretary yesterday. I want to compliment you as well. I'm very pleased to see and learn of the animal disease exercise that you're conducting. Yes. in conjunction with Kansas State University. Very positive, and we need to keep that going. Question is, I campaigned on eliminating unnecessary and outdated regulations, and I see that's also one of your priority objectives here. Do you have any specific recommendations for us? Thank you.
We have a whole host of regulations that we're going through to update and obviously to get rid of some of those. So it's pretty extensive process to go through those. So there are several of those ongoing, and naturally there'll be some suggested repeal and some amendments and maybe some new ones, but it's an ongoing process. And quite frankly, the legislature a couple years ago directed state agencies to do a thorough review, so we've submitted that report last year sometime.
How many of those, how many were there?
I can't recall the number, but I can get that to you.
Just curious, and how many we got rid of or how many we still need to work on. Thank you.
Yes, we'll try to follow up with you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation. On just two quick on this form here, and I don't see a page on it, but what I'm questioning is about 1, 2, 3 pages in. On program expenditures, I notice FY24 actuals versus FY25 adjusted. Salary went from 25 million to 30 million. That looked like a pretty good jump to me. And then the other one was ag marketing that went from 2.5 million to 7.6 million. So I just thought you might comment on those two areas.
Yeah, so a lot of the salary was the enhancement we received 2 years ago for Division of Water Resources. We were having difficulty retaining and hiring engineers and environmental scientists. So that's a good chunk of that. The other one in marketing is probably the federal grants that we've received. We received a couple large grants for local foods and for resilient food systems. So that's going to inflate that quite a bit. And I think you'll see it drop off considerably.
Additional questions, committee? I have one, and I would like for you to be brief because we're up against the clock. As it relates to the the influenza, aviation influenza, you'd mentioned flocks, you'd mentioned dairy herds. Is this something for someone who is not a veterinarian that can be transmitted to goats, sheep, other beef cattle? Because you only mentioned dairy and poultry.
So there's not been any positives that I know of in beef cattle. There are other species. Cats are susceptible to it. There's various wildlife species that have been tested positive. There's been some humans that have tested positive as well. So that's the fear, is that it could jump, and mutate and cause other problems. But we haven't seen a large number in those species, any numbers that I know of in those species that you've mentioned.
This is something we think we can control. If it gets into our wildlife, then they can spread it all across the state fairly quickly if it's very contagious?
Well, it's in the wildlife. I mean, there's count, I mean, literally thousands of migratory birds that have been found that have died from it. So actually, that's how we got it, is from migration of waterfowl. That's what spreads it.
I'm thinking in terms of larger animals, your deer, for example.
There has been, I think, a positive or two across the nation of deer. I don't think they don't seem to show the symptoms that some of these other species.
Mr. Secretary, I do appreciate your presentation, appreciate you being here today, and your availability. Your staff has done a great job. I thought, Senator Fagg, that $5 million increase was strictly for the Secretary, but I'm glad to hear it's not.
No.
Committee, I have nothing further, but briefly, we will tomorrow pick up on the Kansas Water Office, and then on Thursday, just so you will be aware, we will plan a bill hearing on Senate Bill 36. I would have liked to have gotten this a little bit sooner to you, but of course, yesterday we didn't have session. We just got the bill, but we do plan to have a bill hearing on Senate Bill 36. That gives you your idea for the agenda for the rest of the week. No meeting then on Friday. We are adjourned.